This is Oral History Project number 1 for the Young County Museum of History and Cultures. And our subject today is Lee Wiley Burch, who's going to talk a little bit about the Burch Ranch and the Burch family coming to Young County. So, sir, if I could get you to give your name and your birthday right quick.
Tony, it's an honor to be with you. And my name is Lee Wiley Burch, and I was born in Olney, Texas in 1954 to W.P. Nick Burch, Jr., and Iwana Burch.
Okay. How long did your family live in Olney after you were born, sir?
Well, we really didn't live in Olney. We were in Newcastle.
Okay.
And Olney had the hospital.
I understand.
So I guess when I got out of the hospital, I come on back to Newcastle.
Okay. How big was Newcastle back then?
Newcastle was about 600 people back then.
600 people.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And what was it like in Newcastle when you were a kid?
It was not really knowing other big towns except Graham and Olney. It was life in a small town. It was nice. It was nice. We knew everybody, and everybody knew everybody's business. And going up there was quite pleasant, and which is like any other place. It had its ups and downs, but I'm always been proud to call it home.
Well, that's good. Where exactly is Newcastle located in Young County?
Newcastle is it's nearly the center of the county, but it's just a little off center.
Okay.
To the west side.
Well, you would think being that close to the center of the county that it would be the county seat.
Well, at one time they had a big squabble over it, Tony, but it didn't wind up there.
Okay. Well, tell us a little bit about your family history, sir.
Family history. Well, on my dad's side, the Burches, and my great-grandfather and his brother. My great-grandfather was Franklin Pierce Burch. They called him Frank. And my great-great-uncle was Thomas James Burch. They come here sometimes around, I'm saying 1874. Frank would have been, my grandfather would have been probably around 22 years old, and his brother TJ would have been about 24 years old. And they came seeking land and places to start a cattle ranch and raise a family. TJ remained a bachelor. He never was married, never had any children, of course, and Frank and Nanny, my great-grandmother, had 8 children. And my grandfather Wiley was one of those children.
What was your great-grandmother's name?
Great-grandmother's name was Nanny.
Nanny.
Nanny, N-A-N-N-I, Nanny Burch.
Okay, I thought that might have been a nickname.
No, that's all I've ever heard, and we've researched that, and that's what we found.
Okay. About what year was that they came here, do you know?
We're thinking around 1874.
1874.
Now, Nanny didn't come with him. She stayed in Virginia.
Okay.
Yeah, they came here from eastern Tennessee, Claiborne County, Tennessee, and western Virginia, which would have been Scott County, Virginia.
They found land and bought a ranch here?
Yeah, they bought a lot of land from Texas Immigration Land Company.
So they were original.
T-E-N-L, yes. Yeah, T-N-L. We have the old deeds from the state.
Oh.
The old handwritten deeds. The oldest deed we have was filed in Austin, and it was filed in 1879 and give back to the Burches from Austin around 1887. Mail was slow then, too. It's all handwritten, and we're saying that they probably sent it all off, sent everything off a little earlier than that. We found indications of them being here, as early as 1874. They were part of a movement. Everybody had a sign down there that said GTT down east. They'd gone to Texas after the Civil War.
Yes, sir.
And they come to Texas.
Okay. How much land did they
They
acquire?
accumulated around, which is all west of Lake Graham, what is now Lake Graham. They accumulated some 3,400 acres there.
Wow.
And then 2 sections of land, which is on the Stevens County line, which is in a community known as Huffstuttle.
Okay. And how much land did they have there in those 2 parcels?
They had 2 sections, which would have been 1,280 acres.
Okay. So they got the original 640 acre plots from Texas Immigration Land.
Yeah.
Okay. And so they got their ranch. Did he build a homestead on it or stay in Graham or what?
What they did, where we found towards the east side of the ranch, what is now what they call Gateway Road, out there on that side of the ranch, we found where they had a cabin. He and his brother, they had a cabin built there. And they stayed in that cabin and probably in wagon and homesteaded right there for a while till they built a house. The old ranch house, the chimneys are still standing. One of them had carved in one of the rocks at the top was the number 1885. So it took them a while to build that house and get that chimney and get it going good. My granddad, Wiley, was the first child born in Texas. When they had he was born in that house.
Okay.
And my dad was also born in that house in 1922.
When was your granddad born in there?
Grand was born in 1899.
Okay.
And that was the same year that T.J. Burch passed away, in 1899.
When did Nanny come to?
That's what we're saying sometime in the 1890s.
Okay.
Yeah, she's sometime in the 1890s. All the older kids were born in Virginia, and she brought them with her. When Grandpa would go home, and they say every time he'd go home, well, they'd have a kid. So anyway, with Granddad being born there in 99, he had a house established. That's when we'll say she was probably 880s to in the 90s. There she got to Texas.
Okay. And Granddad passed away from what, sir?
My great grandfather.
Yes, sir.
Some kind of lung disorder.
Okay.
And he passed away in 1917. Nanny continued to run the ranch, and she ran it with an iron hand from 1917 to 1932. Now, she was still living at 32. I'll go back up a little bit, tell you a little bit about Nanny Burch.
Okay.
Nanny Burch, they say, was quite a lady. Said she was very, very religious, and she was more of a Pentecostal religion. They say that she was just as at home at the Mount Zion Church here in Graham as she was in any church she was ever in. They found records of her attendance. I also have a clipping from the Graham Leader, 1905, where her and a lady rode to town and bought a subscription to the Graham Leader and sent it back east to a sister. So she was quite a lady, Nanny Burch.
Okay. And did you ever hear any interesting stories about your great-granddad when he got here? That was right at the end of the Indian Wars, pretty much in our area here.
Well, great-grandpa Frank Burch was quite the trader, I understand. Horse trader, mule trader. He stayed gone a lot from the ranch and supplied, I understand, supplied horses and mules for the military, a lot of them out in New Mexico. And he would make the money trading these horses to purchase the land. TJ would stay here and run the ranch, get everything started, and that's the way they operated. There was a piece in the Newcastle Register way back there about my great-grandfather trading horses. And after the turn of the century, him and a lady named Eliza Burch had a livery stable there in Newcastle, and there are pictures of it over there in that museum that Catherine Bailey put together at the old community center.
Yes, sir.
And Miss Bush and him were partners in that livery stable.
Okay. And this is Franklin Pierce.
Franklin Pierce,
yes,
that's his grandfather. Okay. This was in the early teens when Newcastle was a baby. It was established around 1908. And this had to be in the 10s, 15s.
How many cattle did they have at that time, or did they pretty much concentrate on horses and mules?
Had a lot of cattle, and I'm gonna say with that many acres, they probably won 300 or 400 at one time. They had that. Granddad said when he was a boy, growing up in the teens, that there weren't very few mesquites on the property. Gently rolling hills and good buffalo grass and everything. And when they started trailing cattle through the years up from Mexico, from South Texas, they brought them in. Those mesquites would flourish up here in this good clay.
Yes.
So that's where we got the blessing of mesquites.
The blessing of mesquites.
But it looked like it does. Some of our country we dozed and reclaimed out there. It looked like it did then. It would sustain a lot of cattle.
Well, I know that Randolph Marcy, when he made his inspection of this area, said that he thought that it would be prime cattle and beef country. So, okay. Tell me about the homestead that they built. Do you remember anything about it?
I saw pictures.
Saw pictures of it.
It was wood. It was a wood frame house. And of course, it had 2 big rock chimneys. And sometime later years, they put a rock fence around it. Yes, I do remember the house standing. I stayed in that house. One of our mutual friends lived in that house, Frosty Beckham and his family. They rented it. My Uncle Leland wound up with that part of the property. And the old ranch house, I got to spend a night out there on the weekend with Frosty, and so I could say I stayed in the old ranch house.
Okay. Is any of it still standing, the rock fence?
The rock fence and the 2 chimneys are still standing.
Okay.
Somewhere in later years when it's set abandoned, it burned.
Okay. And they raised 8 kids in it.
Raised, yeah, very well. Yeah.
Okay. And how many rooms were in this?
5, I think. They had a screened-in porch. When my granddad would be my grandmother, Lily, she had tuberculosis. And they had to add a screened-in porch and let her sleep out there with that tuberculosis.
Okay.
She eventually died when my dad was 15.
Do you remember what year that was?
1937.
1937. Okay. And TJ pretty much ran the ranch while your great granddad traded horses and mules to the military. When did your grandfather get into the picture exactly as what he did?
1932.
1932.
1932. Nanny Burch brought the kids in, the boys in, and one sister, Sarah, we called her Sally. She aired. She was given some of the land at Huffstuttle, which would have been 600 something acres there. My uncle Charlie Burch, he was one of the older kids. He got some of the land at Huffstuttle also, another 640 acres. And my granddad, Wiley, he got his part. And then Delwyn Burch's dad, Gene, which is granddad's brother, he got a part of it. And then there was a brother, Tom, he got part of it up here. And another brother, Leland, got it. Leland, let's see, Leland, Tommy, Sarah, and Charlie, and Wiley. Tom were the owners, wound up owners of the land. Two more sisters, they married and they weren't around. They didn't. I don't think they got any of the land.
Okay.
One of them committed suicide. I do know that. I don't know whether it was Cora or Myrtle, but did. That's where I'm not clear. But
okay.
They split that ranch up out here in 1932. Dad was 10 years old at that time, and he remembered digging post holes and where the corner post of all the different ones' property was.
Okay.
I've still got one of the old corner posts.
And your granddad's name again was?
Wiley.
Wiley. Okay.
Wiley Patton.
Wiley Patton.
The name Wiley goes back 7 generations. I mean, my grandson is the 7th generation of Wiley.
Wow. So he got his at 15. 15 years old.
What was that?
That's when your grandmother died? When he was 15?
No.
I'm sorry.
No. My dad was 15 when his mother died.
Okay. So
Nanny Burch lived up until the 40s, but she split the ranch up in 1932.
Okay. So did Charlie, being the oldest, did he go straight into ranching, or did he try something else?
Tom was oldest.
Tom was oldest. Okay.
Charlie would have been Charlie and Sally would have been Charlie, Sally, and Tom were the 3 oldest ones.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah, they all were involved in ranching.
So they went straight into it.
Yes.
Okay. Was it pretty much divided 640 acres per?
Yeah, more or less.
Okay.
Yeah, somewhere in there.
Okay. So how much acreage did Wiley get? Do you remember?
Wiley got close to that.
Okay.
600 something.
Who got the homesteaded area? Was that Wiley?
Leland.
Leland. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then Leland bought Tom's part.
Was that after Tom passed, or?
I think, yes, sir.
Okay. Okay. Did Wiley build a homestead on his property? No, he didn't. Okay.
He lived in Newcastle.
He lived in the town of
He moved from
Newcastle.
ranch to Newcastle.
Okay.
Remarried.
Okay. And what about Tom? Did he stay out on the ranch?
Tom built a house on the ranch, and then he moved to Newcastle.
Is that house still standing? Do you know?
No, it's not still standing.
Okay. Do you remember about what time Tom moved to Newcastle?
It would have been in the 30s.
Okay.
And it could have been before then. They got a picture of him sitting on a horse in the middle of the what's now Highway 380 going through Throckmorton, where the old that old cafe, the hole in the wall was. He was sitting there on a horse, and it was way back there.
Okay.
He didn't necessarily have to live. I know he lived there in the 30s sometime.
Okay. How did the family handle the Depression in the 20s? Do you know? Was that pretty hard on them?
I heard lots of stories about the Depression and things they tightened up on, and somehow they managed to survive through it. And that was one thing that Dad and them always talked about was, he was pretty young, but he remembered a lot of things that went on. He remembered seeing a nickel hamburger stand when they'd walk down the street over here, and they never had a nickel to get a hamburger.
To buy a hamburger for a nickel.
Yeah,
wow.
and different things. And then I heard them talk a lot about the drought in the 50s, about screwworms. The screwworm eradication was one of the greatest things that ever happened in Texas agriculture. And Dad remembers a dip vat and showed it to me that was built on the ranch. And he says he never remembers anybody using that. That's how old that thing was.
Wow.
And it was way back there. And then we had a family named Moat. And the Moat family lived in the house that Tom left there on the ranch. And Roy Moat, he farmed for the Burches. Evidently, Burches had quite a few acres in corn and wheat and cotton. And Mr. Moat farmed for them and sharecropped with them. And he had a son named Bill that was born on the ranch in 1923. And he and my dad was a single child, and he and Bill grew up as brothers there on that ranch. And so Moat has contributed a lot of knowledge of ranch history to me, old Bill Moat, before he passed away. Dad would be 99 this year. Bill would be 98. So
okay.
They were around a long time.
This dip vat that you saw, what was it made out of?
It was dug down on the sides and had rock walls on it, and it had an inner way that drive the cattle down in it, and the cattle would come out a ramp. It was whoever did it did a good job. I can tell you, they told me the old rock man back then is named Biggerstaff.
Biggerstaff?
Mr. Biggerstaff done a lot of rock work. I've got a headstone carved out of a cellar that he made for my great granddad. At F.P. Burch, 1915 on it. And he that looked like some of his mason work there on that built vat.
Okay. Did he live in Newcastle?
Biggerstaff, yeah, think so.
Okay.
He lived in that area because a lady named Lottie Cave over in Newcastle, that was his daughter. I believe that's the way it was told me. There's so many stories, Tony, that when I walk out of here today, I'll think of about 25 that I didn't tell you, but maybe we'll catch them somewhere.
Okay. Well, let's go all the way back to your great-granddad. Do you have a story on him?
Well, yes, I do. A good one.
Okay.
There's two more families come down. There's a lot of families come back in those days to Texas. One being the Bullock family, one being the Sloan family. And Another family was the Rays. The Rays property joined us down on the west side, and the Rays were Pentecostal, and they had a tabernacle down on down on Farm Road 61, just between our place and Fort Belknap. Well, I told you a while ago, my grandma, Nanny, she was real religious, and she drugged my grandfather to a revival they had at that tabernacle. Well, Ricky and Randy Ray's great-grandfather, Jim Ray, was the pastor of that church. And he was up preaching one night, and he said, I had a vision. I had a vision that Squire Burch donated several acres of property for the betterment of our church. Everybody clapped and hollered. My little old grandpa, I've seen pictures of him, he looked like Kenny Rogers, the singer. He stood up and he said, and I too had a vision, had a dream, a vision, that y'all gave it back to him. I always cherish that story because I see where a lot of the humor and things that I do and my dad did and stuff comes, that means a lot to me, and it means a lot that grandmother was the Christian she was.
Yes, sir. I wonder what her response to that discussion
I imagine whopped him with a big hat.
Did the family end up donating land
I
for the
don't have
tabernacle?
any idea. I don't think so, but I think it was I don't know. They remained, all of them remained friends forever.
Okay.
Yeah.
Do you happen to know maybe what year that revival was?
Oh, no.
Okay.
No, it was turn of the century anyway, or way before.
Okay.
I'm going to say it was in the 90s, 1890s.
Well, that's pretty good. What about Nanny Burch? There's an interesting story that has to do with her.
Well, a sweet story.
A sweet story.
Miss Moat, Bill Moat's mama, and her were talking one day about gardening. And Miss Burch, Nanny Burch says, well, they're talking about flowers. And Nanny Burch says, I raised 8 pretty flowers. And talking about those kids.
Yes.
I thought that was so sweet. Yeah, so I'll get to see her someday. I hope I've done okay.
Well, tell me, did TJ, being a bachelor in the 1870s, any stories about having to deal with other settlers coming in, or just stuff that happened on the ranch?
They told a story that was passed down, and about when they lived in the cabin, he and Frank Burch's grandpa, that 2 riders come up late one evening. And back then, the way I understand it, people would just be traveling through the country. They'd see a firelight, stop, have grain and stuff, maybe for the horses or something, or whatever they had, and share a meal. Nobody ever asked questions about each other or anything, about their business. They just spent the night and travel on. Well, there were 2 gentlemen pulled into the Burch household there and talked to them. And they, gathered, I guess, around the fire or whatever. And as they saddled up the next morning, he said, "You guys have sure been hospitable to us, and what would your name be?" And he told him, I'm Frank, and this is Tom. We're Burch brothers. He said, "Well, I'm Frank, and this is my little brother Jesse, and we're headed to Missouri to see our mama. We've been down here on some work." So that would have been way back and they told it to be Frank and Jesse James. And then to verify that James was down here about that time, Marlene Edwards, Rick's mom, said that she had a great aunt that actually dated Jesse James. And they were never wanted for anything in Texas. And anyway, that was one of the stories that I've heard about.
Okay. Great aunt dated Jesse or Frank?
She dated Fred Jesse.
Jesse. Wow.
And that would have had to have been in the early 1870s. I'm not real clear on the date on any of that. We think they were here, because of the way the cabin was and everything. We've been over there with metal detectors and things and found pieces of where that cabin was. But that was a story that was told, and then they were here when the cattle raisers were organized here in 1877. We know that. And but the story of Jesse and Frank was one of the old family stories that had been passed down for years.
Was your grandfather or any in the family present when the Cattle Raisers Association was founded?
Yeah,
I
think so.
Signing on the...
He wasn't signed on it, I don't think.
Okay.
I know they were here.
I'll have to check. I've got a friend and see if there was a brand registered in the Cattle Raisers book back then.
Yeah.
Okay.
They were so young in the putting the ranch together back then that it was, I just don't know. I do know that they were up and going because they leased some land to the Graham family in around 1882. I've got a cousin named Greg Burch. His dad is Kenneth Burch, which would be Leland's son. Goes back to Leland Burch, granddad. And Greg's been doing a lot of research down east and found out a lot of things about that went on and how it transpired and a lot of the business aspects of the ranch.
Okay. The land that they leased to the Grahams for cattle farming?
Cattle, I imagine.
Okay.
And I have no idea what part of that place it would be.
Okay.
As you travel down the Lake Road, Fort 3003, everything west of that Lake Road was Burch property. Yeah, and I don't think that anywhere on the lake was Burch property. Now, Burch's had at least. Daddy tells me, when the lake went so dry that he remembered farming that bottom. And he said there's still 50 foot of water in that bottom down there because we farmed that when I was a kid before the lake was built. And so, but they farmed quite a bit, and where the Gateway place is and all that there, that was all, they all had that lease.
Okay. So there was a general split in all the property there. How much does the Burch family still have out there in that area?
Around 2,600 acres.
Okay.
Yeah.
And is that all together, or is it divided between different Burches still to this day?
It's divided.
Okay.
I have a sister, Karen, that got 240 when Dad passed away in 2009 on the south side of the highway. My brother Charles's part, it was sold. He passed away. And then I've got a section of land on the north side of the highway. Mine's known as the West Pasture. And you go through mine and you get into what was Eugene Burch.
Okay.
And then it went to Delwyn Burch, and now it's Belinda Cisneros.
Okay.
Belinda being Delwyn's daughter.
Yes.
And then next to the lake, running around the lake road and that part is my cousin Kenneth, which would have been Leland's son.
Okay.
Leland is the uncle I was named after. I was named after Leland Burch and my grandpa Lee Wiley Burch.
Okay.
But it's still, production-wise, my cousin Belinda and I and my sons Adam and Dan are the only ones just running cattle now.
Okay. Well, I know that before they built the lake, just the way the land laid, it made it a whole lot easier to travel through that part of the county, going from Fort Richardson to Fort Belknap. And are there any interesting stories or history that you can tell me about that part?
Oh, yeah. The overland stage Butterfield run through our property. We have a way station on part of our property that belonged to the Butterfield stage line, made out of rock, and it's about 7 miles as the crow flies from Fort Belknap. You can still see trails on what was the Brown Ranch over there. You still see trail where that stagecoach trail went through there. Okay, now the most, I guess that was the important road back then for traveling.
Yes, sir.
But a road that parallels Farm Road 61 and come back through here with the Fort Worth, Fort Belknap Military Road, travel through our country.
Okay.
And when it was abandoned, the Wichita Falls Southern Railroad took a lot of that right away and used it for their train. And that train started running about, from Wichita Falls to De Leon. The first leg of it started in 1908. And that train ran till 1954. And then it was made into public travel from that time until 1960 when it was paved, made Farm Road 61.
Okay.
So there's a lot of interesting things went on down in that part of the world. There was oil. Oil was discovered on the Burch Ranch in 1929. And with the 3 wells, the tandem well 1, 2, and 3, and we still know where those were. You've heard of that good old luck some families have. Well, the Burches on tandem well 1, it turned out a gusher. I mean, it was a good well. And it was producing, I forget, 100 barrels a day or whatever it was. Tom Burch, the older brother, he was kind of old nanny, running the ranch, and he would not. There was people tried to buy that and wouldn't sell it. Sinclair was one of them trying to buy it, and 10 days later it went to a trickle. So I sold it.
Oh, wow. Well, I'm sorry for the interruption. You were telling me about tandem well number 1, and you said that it produced 100 barrels a day.
I think that's what Dad told me, that they were guessing it to be around 100 barrels a day.
And what happened after that?
This was in 1929. And that was about the time everything was fixing to crash.
Yes, sir.
But it was sometime before that. But he remembered when he would have been 7 years old then, and he remembered going and playing on the old wood derrick and everything, and said this well was just tremendous. And said, I believe it was Sinclair come in and tried to buy this from the Burch family. And Tom, being the eldest Burch and doing the affairs for his mother, said, no, we're not going to sell. And 10 days later, the well went to a trickle. So that old Burch luck is still running. And I have the old well where the wells were for Tandem 2 and Tandem Well 3 on my property. Evidently, they weren't near the well that one was. But there's still some production on the Burch Ranch. But that was the story that was told about that one. You didn't hear that much in Young County history. But Dad said it was a big whale.
Huh.
Yeah. And Well, that was the way I laughed when he said it went 10 days, it went to a trickle.
Yeah.
Sounded so familiar.
It sure does.
Yeah.
Especially for a lot of people at that point in time,
Yes.
coming out here and looking to make the big score and then having the markets and the banks drop like that.
Yeah. And then everything went south in 20, later on in 29.
Well, did any of your property have any of the coal deposits that they found
Yes.
in Newcastle?
Yes, they did.
Okay.
Okay. On my property, when you look off of Farm Road 61, you see a big gash in the mountain over there where the water tower is. They blew that out thinking there was coal there. Okay, they didn't find coal on that part, but they went on around the mountain to the north and to the west, and yes, they had a good deposit over there and mined coal out of there. And one of our Graham natives that we thought a lot of, Gene Wignall, was born at the foot of that old Burch Mine mountain.
Really?
1902, I believe, it was told. 1901 or 1902 when Gene told me he was born over there. But yes, there was coal over there.
And when you say they blew it out, I'm assuming you mean dynamited.
And I'll tell you why it was dynamite. When my buddy Kent Creel was helping me doze the mesquites over there, I was on a job somewhere, and he said, "Lee Wiley, you need to get back down here at the ranch and see what I found." And I come back down to the ranch, and he carried me up on the side of that mountain, and all these trees, the forks of these trees had rocks, and the forest mesquite growed around them. I mean, and an oak tree, and there's rocks all through these trees, and there's still some. I'll show them to you sometime.
Okay.
But that must have been one big charge of dynamite to blow out. That's where that rock had to come from.
Wow.
And they're evidently, old history tells us that there was a lot of whiskey made on the Burch Ranch back through the thickets and stuff, and we thought that might have been some markings, but it wasn't. That was where they blowed that out for that coal mine.
There you go.
But anyway, that's something to see. All those rocks go through those.
There you go. You can tell people that the trees on your property are rock hard.
Produce rocks. Yeah. I'd rather have a rock than I had a mesquite, though.
Yes, sir.
I don't know, but you might.
Well, that's pretty interesting. So after the homestead that burned, they built another ranch house. Is that one still standing, the third one?
No.
What happened to it?
No, wait a minute. The one I'm telling you about that Dad and them was born, that old house remains standing.
Okay.
Frank, it's my grandpa, he built a new house over there. Around 1915 somewhere. And it was a big, nice 2-story house, and it burned to the ground. And all we got left of it, we got the headstone out of the cellar with his name on it.
Okay.
I've got it sitting over there in a cabin at the ranch. But that old ranch house I was telling you that Dad and Granddad and we stayed in, they made a rent house out of it. It burned probably somewhere down in the 70s. But it was they originally with wood and they put rock on it. And anyway, but you can still tell where it was at. The old chimneys are there. And we've got 2 barns that were built. One of them you can tell was way older than the other one, out of rock. And they were built in the 1800s.
Wow.
Still there. And then the house that Uncle Gene built, that Delwyn was born in the 30s, it's still standing barely. It's in the, there's still some structures over there.
Okay. We might have to take the camera portable and go look and see.
And we've got a log barn. That's where great grandpa kept his donkey, his jack, what they called him. It's made out of logs, and it's R.T. Wells. We done a study one time. He thought that was probably the oldest barn in Leon County. And
okay.
Anyway.
Did any of the stories they tell you say where they took the horses and the mules to sell? I'd love to see if I could find some purchase documentation.
Yeah.
I don't know if they drove them up to Fort Sill in Oklahoma or past that to
I
Fort
imagine
Leavenworth.
he had sold several of them there, and I'm not real clear on that, but they tell about it, if you can pull up about a 19, way back there, early 60s, Newcastle Register, Jasper Deal had a story about F.P. Burch in there that was real interesting.
Okay.
It tells about him being the horse trader he was. And in the later years, we found mineral. These landmen had found mineral out and found that where theirs had mineral. And where did that come from? And we figured that he traded horses for mineral rights at one time.
Oh, okay.
Some of it. And back then you'd make a transaction on anywhere. My grandpa Wiley said he saw a guy write a check for a cow on a watermelon rind one time. So I guess they could trade horses for mineral rights too. They could do that.
I can see that. Because back then, a horse was probably a lot more important than mineral rights.
Yeah.
Well, we've talked about a lot of stuff that happened on your ranch. We haven't talked about Jesse Stems yet.
Well, can I back up just a little?
Okay.
Tell you a little about my granddad, Wiley.
Wiley.
He was a real cowboy. And of course, my dad, Wiley, W.P. Jr. Nick was too. But my granddad was a school board member at Newcastle several years. He was a scoutmaster over there. He was a quiet man, always had a chest chew full of beech nut tobacco. And he was quite a granddad. And he had the ranch until 81 when he passed away, from 1932 to 1981, and then Dad took it over in 81. Dad kept it till 2009 when he passed away. And they were all, Dad was in the military. He was in the Army. Grandpa always said he was in World War I long enough to get his gun loaded. He enrolled the first part of 18. I think the war ended right then.
And your dad fought in World War II?
Yes, he was over in England and France. He traveled. I think his main job is he hauled convoy over there, done something. He was he got the Bronze Star and some other stuff, but we never saw the medal.
Was he in the Army or the Navy or?
He's in the Army.
Army, okay.
He tells it like this. He and Uncle Leland and Uncle Charlie all went, when they found out about Pearl Harbor, they unsaddled the horses and they headed to the recruitment office, like everybody did. Dad said everybody was mad and we wanted to go get them. And it was several days before they heard about Pearl Harbor. But he said that he went and they took him in California. Uncle Leland, they kept him in the United States doing clerical work. And in a nice way, they sent my Uncle Charlie home for having flat feet. Charlie is where I get my size from, and he was one of my greatest mentors, my Uncle Charlie was. He was a big guy, and I'm pretty sure they were being nice telling him he had flat feet. Us fat boys know.
Yes, sir.
And, anyway, it was Dad for 3 hours. We knew when Dad was going to pass, and I asked him one day. He asked me. He said, "Is there anything we haven't talked about yet?" And I said, "I'd like to know about your military," because he didn't talk about it. He said, "We just went to do a job." Right. For 3 hours, Tony, it's the greatest World War II history I've ever heard come from my dad. And I'll have that, cherish it right there,
Can you remember it to pass it on for your family?
I'll pass it on to family, what things that he could tell me. He was very truthful and very, he filled an empty spot for me, I guarantee you right there. And I go back to every uncle, everybody in that Burch line. I just always thought the world of them. I grew up asking questions. They were very tight-lipped bunch of guys. They didn't talk much. I had to dig it out of them, but I'm glad I did because I know I know just enough to send it back to my kids and everything. And someday, you know, it's all inherited land. It's all eventually gonna wither away. But for some brief shining moments, we were ranchers, and we still are.
Yes, sir. Do you want to share some of his World War II stories?
He talks about one of the most treasured ones that I've got is him talking about how lonely that train was riding from California to Boston Harbor. And they never got off the trains.
Wow.
And he said there was thousands of troops, and said just went across and said, when we got to see Oklahoma, I never thought I'd cry seeing Oklahoma, but I did. And he talks about it, and he said, I got over there in Boston Harbor, and they put us on these ships. They said, we landed in Liverpool. They said, thousands of green uniforms. They couldn't stir them with a stick. And then I heard this voice, and he said, Rowden, where you at? And his old roping buddy, Jay Rowden from Newcastle, was out there in the crowd. He run into him. He didn't see him again until after the war, but he talks about that. You know, seeing Jay at that time. And then J.C. Bullock, Stump Bullock, John Charles Bullock's dad, he was at an air base over there, and he used to take aerial photographs. And anyway, the story is that this wasn't ever out for public record as far as I know, because John C. and them had never heard it. But Dad tells that he's hauled reconnaissance down to haul supplies to that air base, and knew Stump was there, but he never saw him. But he said they were up in the plane, and there was 11 on the plane besides Mr. Bullock, Stump. He was in the bottom taking aerial photography, and said the pilot was shot. They said none of those other boys knew how to land that plane. Said Stump come up out of that basement of that plane and landed that plane to save those boys' lives.
Wow.
Now that was a story, and Dad told that just as plain as day, and John said nobody had ever heard that story. So that's a story that World War II was never out. You know, it happened to one of our own here, and he's all of them's heroes. And I'd go on and on about what they did, what he talked about. He just said we were mad. We went to do a job, and we wouldn't be here today if we hadn't done that job, and I always appreciated that.
Okay. How old were you when your dad went?
You know what?
How old were you when your dad went to World War II?
Oh, I wasn't born.
Okay, that's right.
That was in 19, he went in 42.
Yeah, and it's 53. Okay.
That was the last thing he wanted to think about.
Well,
Quite a character that guy was. Quite a character.
any other historical references to your dad that you can think of?
He was a calf roper, and he and the Sloans and the Bullocks and those guys, they done a lot of roping around the county, and all of them were pretty good at it. And on the hill on the ranch out there, I've got a memorial to Dad and to the ranch, and I've got his old roping horse, Major, cut out of metal, sitting on the side of that hill.
Oh, okay.
And anyway, that was his. That was his sport that he did. He loved calf roping. But I asked him one time, said, Nick, what was your claim to fame? And he said, oh, Lord, that's not hard to answer at all. Said, I'm the only man in Newcastle, Texas that ever run for school board and got 100 votes and didn't get elected. Now, you talk about hitting you blindsided down. And you know me, I'll laugh. I'd never heard that. And I got 100 votes. Said Tommy Jack Jordan beat me, and said, "We're sure proud of Tommy."
That's pretty good.
That's pretty good. That's pretty good old West Texas thinking right there.
Yes, sir, it is. Well, was he cowboying? Did he do rodeo too, or just professional cowboy? Calf
He
roping?
just day money, just rope.
Okay.
And they made rodeos. He won. He always talked about a rodeo he won way off one time. Found out it was Haskell, and they stand in line to get his money. And he heard two guys behind him. One of them looked at the other and said, "Who won this whole rodeo?" He said, "Some old boy from Graham riding his plow horse." He said, "I just collected my money and come home."
Riding his plow horse. Well, you said that Charlie had a big impact on you, your uncle.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, tell me about Charlie.
Charlie was a big man. Charlie couldn't pronounce his R's real good, and he was a clown. He lived down in Huffstuttle on the Stevens County line, and we'd go. He was a bachelor until he was 50. And when he was 50, he married a lady named Bess Moreland. It was the best thing ever happened to him. And I just learned from him about how important that sense of humor was, and not. I tried to instill that just don't worry all the time. Things will take care of themselves. He was kind of a real laid back kind of old boy. Like I say, he was a big man, and he had some really classy statements that he made. He raised wolfhounds. He was a member of the North Texas Wolf Hunter Association, which coached, is what they hunted.
Yes, sir.
Not Ho Wilson, the original Bobby Wilson, not Ho Jr.'s dad was part of that. Ed Ragland, there were several of them around, and Dad had a membership card somewhere with Uncle Charlie's name on it, and Mr. Wilson was president. But Nanny Burch lived with Charlie down there in her later years on that ranch at Huffstuttle. And she said, "Charlie, why don't you sell these old dogs and get you some chickens?" He said, "Oh, Mama," said, "who ever heard of a chicken wanting a wolf?" Anyway, he had a lot of statements like that. He's real easygoing, laid back, and Daddy stayed with him a lot. Daddy's mama, like I say, died when he was 15, and he lived with different ones. Lived with Charlie a lot too. And, anyway, that's some of the finest history I've ever heard. Daddy told a story about. He had an old wood stove. He lived in the old Huffstuttle schoolhouse where he lived down there. It's still standing there. One of my cousins lives there, but Dad said he stayed down there with him one cold night, and Charlie was out wolf hunting, and said, "Oh, I had that warm place in that bed, and I had them quilts pulled up, and I was warm," and said he come in from hunting and said he moved me over and got in my warm spot, and I kicked him. And said he whooped me with the top of one of his old stovepipe boots, give me a little spanking there. Said he got my warm spot. But anyway, quite a character. Dad took it pretty hard when Charlie passed. He was the clown of the family.
I've been to that Huffstuttle schoolhouse once.
Yeah.
So, pretty interesting place.
Yeah, Roscoe Jordan was his old side. You remember old Roy Rogers had Gabby Hayes for a sidekick. Uncle Charlie had Roscoe Jordan, Tommy Jack's daddy, over there from Newcastle. They stayed down there and helped him build fences and everything. I mean, he built the fences for Charlie, but I guess. But anyway, he just got to be part of the family too. He just so much stuff that been going through the years, and I sure hope I've enlightened you with some of it.
Yes, sir. It's been very interesting. And like I said, there's still some we want to cover. I know that you've got a letter there you want to tell me about.
I want to read you just an excerpt of this. This was found in some of Eliza Bush's memoirs over there that come out of the house in Newcastle, and it was signed by T.J. Burch, and he's the great uncle, and it had to be in the 1800s. I know it was in the 1800s, but part of it says he's writing to brother Frank, and Frank must be back in Virginia, and he's saying, we are having another drought, which cut off the corn and the cotton. Money's pretty scarce. This leaves me all well and hope to find you the same. I love this statement. Cross over this momentarily and let me know what you're going to do. I love that. Instead of think this over momentarily, it's cross over this momentarily.
Yes.
Let me know what you're going to do. Sincerely, your brother, T.J. Burch. And always, that's the only thing I've got with his handwriting, everything on it that belonged to T.J. And I have maybe one little picture somewhere of him to it, but when Frank died, all of his part went to T.J. I mean, when T.J. died, all it went to Frank.
Right.
They are buried with Nanny Burch in the Oak Grove Cemetery.
Okay.
There's one more story out of Oak Grove I've got to tell to make Burch history, this interview complete. All this time, I'd go down and see my ancestors, my grandparents, and would see their stones in that spot in the Oak Grove Cemetery. I'd see this little stone that's out of native birch rock that says M.C. Owen was born. I assumed that this was a baby that was born on the ranch, and it was just born. Never died, was born dead. Well, Greg goes back east. He's researching family history. And this one distant cousin down there says, hey, my aunt went to Texas with a preacher, and they lived with the Burches back in the 1880s. He said, well, what was her name? He said, her name is Martha C. Owen. And said she died somewhere around 1885. So I said, Greg, there's a stone in that cemetery that says M.C. Owen was born. So it was a hot summertime. We took some little shovels and some bottled water and went down to Oak Grove Cemetery and went to digging around that stone. And I said, there's something else here. And about that far down, about 1.5 feet down, said there's something else wrote on it. And it said on there, M.C. Owen was born so-and-so 1861, died so-and-so 1885. I'm assuming that being that old Burch native rock, that lady died at 24 years old on that Burch ranch. And they buried her on the Burch ranch. And when T.J. died in 1899, they didn't move her, but they moved her stone to Oak Grove. You talk about some old boys hollering down there in Oak Grove Cemetery. They uncovered that stone, but that's how many years of growth of stuff had been on that stone.
Wow.
And so there was another family member right there that we found that nobody wouldn't have had a clue if Greg hadn't done some research back east and found that. And so,
well, that's pretty
anyway, that's just another piece of Burch history. We still hadn't found that post with the fruit jar full of money under it, but anyway, I doubt we will.
Well, the reason they hide that stuff is so it can't be found.
I'd say we found several artifacts around the ranch. And when do you want to talk about Jesse Steele?
Well, let's do the ranch history at a different time because we've covered just about every Burch but one, and that would be you.
Oh boy,
your generation. So
there you go. I think Jesse Steele's story stands alone, and anything else I can tell about it. And bless his heart, Jim Ross just lost May. I think he passed away Jim helped me put together the sweetest story about just them. And I'll share it with you sometime.
Okay. Well, let's do this one then, and let's talk a little bit about Lee Wiley Burch. Generation 7 or 6?
I'll be fifth generation.
Fifth generation.
Fifth generation on it. And, well, I grew up in Newcastle. I lived and don't know if I ever grew up, but anyway, I lived in Newcastle, raised in Newcastle. Went to Newcastle school. We had a good time there at Newcastle school. 12 years from first to graduated in 72. And got real interested in Future Farmers of America, FFA. Got my American Farmer degree in 1973 with the best teacher I ever had, Mr. Ronald Edelman. And then I fortunate enough to go off school and teach ag for, I got off and on taught around 20 years. And probably one of the best parts of my life happened in 74 when I met and married Janann Rogers.
How old were you when you got married?
20.
20? And how old
married on my birthday.
Well, that'd make it easy to remember.
Well, I tell everybody I got married on my anniversary so I can remember my birthday.
And how old was Miss Janann? How old was Miss Janann?
Same age, 20.
20.
Yeah, we've been...
Schoolmates, maybe? Schoolmates?
No.
Really?
She went to school in Graham.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, she went to school in Graham. And anyway, they moved over to Newcastle for just a short time. Joy, her mother Joy, and Jamie was going to school over there. He transferred from Graham over there, and that's when I met her.
Okay.
So we've been together 47 years in May. Anyway, I have two sons, Adam and Daniel. Both of them are partners with me in the construction business, and have two grandchildren. Amy Jo's Adam's daughter, and she's a senior at Newcastle this year. And Preston Wiley, 7th generation Wiley, is Daniel's boy, and he's a 5th grader over at Open Door.
Okay. Well, when y'all got married, where'd you live?
Well, we lived in my granddad Burch's house for just a little while. It was in the summer of 74. And that's when I transferred from Cisco Junior College. I graduated from Cisco Junior College in 74, and we went from there to Commerce, Texas. I went to finished college at East Texas State University. And then from there, interviewed for the ag teaching job at Frisco the day I graduated. Just around Christmas time, we moved to Frisco, Texas. That's where my teaching career started.
And you taught for 20 years.
Yes, sir. I taught at Frisco for 8 years and then moved home to Olney and was there 6 years, and then got out and stayed away from it for a while, and then I taught 5 more years at Newcastle.
Okay. And when you moved back to Olney, were you strictly teaching or still involved with the ranch?
I've always been involved somewhere with the ranch. Dad, just helping Dad.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. And then after Newcastle, did you retire or?
I retired from teaching, but I actually started I'm in the construction business. I actually started my little fencing welding business at Frisco while I was there back in 81 as a sideline. Now we're doing it full time. Everybody says they ask me what I'm doing. I said, well, now I'm using my PhD, my postal digger.
Yes. Well, that's good. Any interesting stories there your first couple of years learning to be married?
When we were married?
Or learning to be married, yes.
Yeah, well, they're interesting. Yeah, she's a sweetheart, and we've been through a lot of different things that happened, and I guess we're about as close now as we've ever been. We've got really have to depend on each other. She's taking care of all the estate of her mom and dad, and we got a lot of things on her plate, and we've really found us a good church.
Well, that's good.
And proud to be part of that. And I tears to my eyes thinking about it. And well, I guess I'm a happy man.
I can see that.
Yeah.
Well, you've got a good family. Got a good story on Janan that we can save and we won't show until.
No. Oh, say she told me, she said, don't tell them about the old aunt in Boston, Massachusetts. I'm not going to share that.
The old hat in
Boston,
Boston,
I tell that story about, you know me, Tony, I've been a jokester and an old BSer all my life, and I heard about, I always tell people, I said, well, I've had an old aunt that they found was part of the Boston Tea Party. And I said, really? I said, Aunt Esther. They said, well, gosh, that's really some good family history. He said, yes, she was the first old bag thrown off the boat. Don't print that. It was supposed to be shot because I told her, anyway, I stole that off Grandpa Jones on the bicentennial when he was doing the excerpt about the bicentennial on Hee-Haw. I think that's what it was. She's the first old bag thrown off the boat.
Wow.
But anyway.
That's pretty good. So, what's your fondest memory of Adam growing up?
Of Adam growing up, that curly hair. That curly hair and his little sense of humor. And anyway, he had natural blonde curly hair and was just he just a sweet little feller. I don't know what happened after that, but he
went with his hair.
He always liked to go with me, and he and Daniel both, and they would go to that welding shop with me, and they started learning how to weld when they were about 6 years old. And of course, we stock showed all over the country, and we're very successful showing lambs and goats and hogs, and I've introduced them to some pretty interesting places and times over the years, and anyway, it's been a pretty good run with them.
Good. Well, give me a memory you want to share with Adam.
What about Adam?
Yes, sir, and then we'll do Daniel.
Oh, Lord, Adam. Gosh, Tony, I've got so many of them. So many of them that just him. One of them is at a stock show at Tyler, Texas, one time, and I've gone to pick up the trailer. We're ready to go home, and he had a showmanship class to go to, and had to show his lamb one more time, and I went out to get that trailer, and I come back, and he's running across the parking lot holding two big trophies in him. His old dad was parked the trailer, we was ready to go. He went and won this showmanship show.
Oh, wow.
Anyway, I'll never forget that. That's one of my classiest scenes of him coming across that parking lot with those trophies in his hand. And I've got so many good memories of him that, places we went and everything. And I guess one of the finest memories, if I had to do with Adam, and I talk about him is how he's treated other people when we'd be somewhere. He's always the nicest, politest young man around people from other communities, and they all just thought the world of him. And I'm glad that he had that personality to do that.
Yes, sir. Well, let's talk about Daniel. What?
Daniel is his extreme knowledge of things, of his sharpness, how smart that kid is. And how he used to climb on the roof of the house to study. And anyway, his brilliant mind. He just got a brilliant mind, and he's the same way. He's got a good personality. He's a little quieter. He's more tight-lipped, like my old uncles were, than Adam was. But he's a sharp young man.
What's a fond memory you'd like to share with him? Like this one in Tyler with Adam running out with the trophies.
Daniel, gosh, I tell you what, they were right. Anyway, he could just barely talk, and his mama was in the back seat with him there. And this old bull come out to the field. He had an old Angus bull. They got pretty close to him, and he looks out there and he hollers, "Look, he got curly hair just like you, Adam." And Daniel and Adam were really close to their Popo Nathan shack. And here's a story about both of them the boys were sworn to secrecy, but they got out.
Okay.
They were all riding in the pasture one day over, and he let them shoot guns. And Daniel was in the front seat, had a loaded 12 gauge between his legs, sitting in the front seat. And they had a Jeep Wagoneer, Popo did. Popo was driving. Well, anyway, Daniel had him sitting in the back seat, and he reaches up and thumps Daniel on the ear. When Daniel turns around to slap him, that shotgun goes off, and that floorboard, all of a sudden the Jeep goes this way,
oh,
blows
no.
the front tire out. Of course, the screaming, the squalling, the bawling, make sure he's all right and everything is fine. Okay, guys, this is between us boys. So for months they went on and nobody ever said a word. But anyway, that was a story there that of those guys. And anyway, it taught them a lot about gun safety right there. They saw what could happen. And of course, there's a learning experience from everything. But anyway, that's a memory that we'd like to not have got to share, because they like to have not told anybody. Evidently, somebody told one of them told one of their friends one day, and it got out. Anyway, I got, like I say, so many memories of them, of things, and just I could write a book about them.
Okay. Well, we're going to pretty much wrap this interview up. Is there anything else about the Burch family you can think of?
I'm just proud to be one.
I can understand that.
Proud to be one, and proud that we're still on the ranch and still plugging along there. And I'm proud of what the boys are doing in the construction world with us, and and just hope we continue on.
That's a 150-year tradition of the Burch Ranch.
Pretty close. Pretty close. In 1994, we went to Austin. Dad and I went to Austin and got the Texas Land Heritage Award for ranches that had been in continuous production for 100 years, for 5 generations. And anyway, that was something that my cousin Jackie Burch, which was Delwyn's wife, she had started. And when she got killed in this car wreck out here, I kind of took that on and pursued it, and we wound up in Austin. Rick Perry was the governor of Texas. Well, he was ag commissioner then, and that's a very, very fond memory of us walking up to accept the award, and Dad's going to pick it up, and Dad just puts me in his place. Says, "Here, you done this. You get this thing." And when I reached up there to shake his hand, he called me by name. Rick Perry did. We'd met a long time before, and that always impressed me about Rick. But I was proud to be there with my dad. I got pictures. I got the deal on the wall. Like Rick always said, I got the T-shirt.
There you go.
But anyway, that's one of the highest honors we've ever had right there.
Okay.
Still rolling.
Yes, sir. Well, Mr. Burch, it's been a pleasure, and we appreciate you giving us your time to record this history. Thank you.
Thank you so much. God bless you.